Thank you, Katarina. Oh, and welcome everyone. So we are now streaming to the world. Um, so we will start a couple of minutes to see who else is arriving, who else will come. Like normal streaming people sometimes have issues connecting and so on. So we might take maybe 4 or 5 minutes to receive more people and start with a crowd, with a bigger crowd. So how is everything going, Christian?
Mhm.
It's all good.
Yes, yes. It was really um, a shame that I couldn't stay longer the last time, because
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
I watched the complete thing, and this was a really interesting discussion you had, I think, afterwards. Besides that, um, Felix' presentation was really, really inspiring. I thought.
Yeah,
Hi.
it was.
Yeah.
Hello. Felix is here. Good.
Yes, I made it.
And Francis
Nice.
also.
Francis is also here. Evo is here. Marcus. So um, I will in the meantime, while we wait maybe 2 3 more minutes, um, I would like to tell you about the future seminars, the upcoming seminars.
Mhm.
So opening the program that I have in my in our activities in our calendar. So the next speaker will be Katarina, actually. So she will, yeah, yeah. It will be Katarina, the next speaker. And for those who know her research, I'm not an expert on what she does, but we were discussing a little bit about the impossibles and the unthinkables and the unexpressibles. So I think she has done a lot of research, and her creation is strongly motivated by that, but by those infinite, and unthinkable things, unreachable things. Is that so, Francis? Maybe you have exchanged much more.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yes. Yes, she thinks about how to express the unexpressible or to represent the unrepresentable. So, like things like negative poetry or infinity or the origin of something out of nothing.
yeah. So we were talking about connections with measure theory, or with like Cantor. For those who know a little bit of mathematics, we were going to Cantor, and I show her a little bit of this zero measure sets, fractal dimensions, and so on. And I think there is a line of development for her artistic, let's say, path along this, or together with these things. So that's one thing that is coming. It's really, I look also forward to it. And then after that, we will have a Karsten Heist, who is part of Christian Gendrake's team, and he will speak about a platform that they are developing for this project. So it's an interdisciplinary audiovisual online platform for creating, I guess, networks that can map into sound or into some other meaning expressions. And then after that, we will have Olaf Witkowski, who is not a member of this group, but it's an active member of the artificial life community, a prominent member of the artificial life community, who is also a violin player,
Oh, wow.
uh, and speaks like 17 languages. It's really like a superhuman to my understanding. He's like, I don't know if he ever sleeps or something like that. It's like very special person. And he will make connections between artificial light concepts and music. Then after that, we will have Stan Wundervoet, who will talk, or Wundervoet? Wundervoet. Okay, yeah, I need to start pronouncing well these things. Stan Wundervoet. And he will talk about ritual aspects of music. It's a talk in preparation. And then finally, I wonder if Markus Wetzler will be interested on giving a talk as well, because he's preparing a project, but we will see. Maybe some other person of the Templeton team, maybe Dirk, maybe we will see. So that's pretty much what we have coming next. So I guess we can start with today's talk. I'm very excited to announce this talk. The speaker is Vincenzo de Florio, who is an amateur. He considers himself an amateur musician and composer, but also a computer science researcher who works particularly in fault-tolerant systems, having a PhD in applied science from the University of Leuven, post-doctoral research in KU.Leuven and University of Antwerp, now researcher in VUB. So he works in, like, as I said, fault tolerance and all the associated concepts like resilient systems, adaptive evolving systems, philosophy of science, antifragility. And he's a prolific researcher with more than 100 publications and H-index 24, and has also received IBM Faculty Awards for his research on fractal social systems. So it's a person, let's say, with a very open, wide and interdisciplinary background in art and science. And also he has particularly done work on what we are concerned with generative music. He will show his research and results on this. So I just will leave you with him, because that's the most interesting part of this. Please, Vincenzo.
Thank you so very much for this nice introduction. I was a little bit, I was listening to you, but I was saying, who's talking about? Okay, that's fine. And that's so very kind of you. I'm absolutely a normal person. I'm going to share my screen now. Just a second, so that I may start with my presentation. All right, so I think I have to move. Yep, oh, sorry. Opla. That's was supposed to start at some other moment. Okay, so my talk is entitled "My Little Grundgestalten," which is a very strange title, I think. I hope it will become clear little by little. So I have to thank again very much Thomas for his introduction. Actually, I had prepared also an introduction here. Indeed, I'm what you might consider as an amateur musician and composer. I compose jazzy, neoclassic, and even alternative rock music. But I also do generative compositions together with traditional compositions. And I also do hybrid ones, coupling aspects of the two. I think the most unexpected result of this has been when Roel Vergauwen, which is the person who chooses talents for the Rock Werchter festival, selected one of my tracks, which was a hybrid track composed by music from me, but also one of these generative compositions that I will present today as a possible target, let's say, for Rock Werchter. And he said, maybe you should consider to participate to this, or to maybe to Ghent, the Ghent Jazz Festival. I was very happy to hear that. But another side of me is, as Thomas already mentioned, I'm a researcher. I had I received a PhD from the University of Leuven, and then I did a postdoc there and the University of Antwerp. I'm now affiliated researcher with VUB CLEA. And as mentioned already, perhaps the most, the best thing I achieved in this side of me has been when IBM awarded me their Faculty Award, which is a prestigious prize. But other very important thing about me, the fact that I'm very interested in philosophy of science. And if you talk to me, give me 10 minutes and I will start talking about Leibniz, which is kind of my fixation. And also I will talk about, I would start talking about Japan, which is another of my fixation. In fact, maybe instead of Japanophile, I could use a weeb as a good description of me. But again, let's shift the attention to this presentation. It's a divertissement, let's say. I will share with you some ideas and visions, more or less clear, about music, mathematics, philosophy, and spirituality. And I will present what I consider to be a unifying model of all these aspects and its application into music. And I will finally, in the last part of my presentation, I will let you listen to some of the tracks that I created with this model. So why do I call this Grundgestalt? I think the best way to explain this is by referring to another concept, which is preformationism. If you ever heard of this word, it's not something related to science. It's an idea that was introduced by Thomas van Leeuwenhoek in the more or less the end of the 17th century. Leeuwenhoek was a very good creator of lenses, and he was the first one to observe spermatozoa. And because of the drawing that he made and the writing, let's call it the papers that he did, he is considered now as the father of microbiology. But he also came up with a very strange idea, with a very strange concept, which is now considered, of course, absolutely not part of science, which is preformationism. In a jiffy, in a nutshell, it means that it's the concept that all beings are the development of miniature versions. Basically, you can find a minuscule animal or a minuscule human being already in spermatic elements. Of course, this is an idea which was repudiated by science. But the concept that maybe can be salvaged from this theory is the fact that in some cases you can have sort of an isomorphism between two domains, cases in which the seed and the being deriving from the seed embody the same concept. So the essence is the same. And that's what happens with this model that I'm going to present, which I will also explain why I call it the Grundgestalt. It's a German word, the meaning is basic shape or fundamental form, and it refers to an idea that was introduced by Arnold Schönberg, according to whom the Grundgestalt is the idea which is at the foundation of a piece of music, or better, it's not just the foundation, it's actually the the piece itself. It's not just the theme, the da-da-da-da. No, it's really the entire symphony, because everything can be derived for it. So in a nutshell, I can say that the two concepts, in a nutshell, a chestnut is a chestnut. If I can say this, if I can make a pun about it. So Grundgestalt is actually preformationism in music. There is a gene which is named by Schönberg, the Grundgestalt, which is like an animalculus. I call it the music calculus, because in this word there is also calculus, which is very important. And within this idea, the whole piece is already contained. And from this idea, the whole piece can be derived through a mechanical procedure. In a sense, you can consider it as the most compact form of music. It's like a compression of the same information. Or you can consider it as a genotype from which you can derive automatically and mechanically a complex phenotype. So we're talking about development, for instance, development in music or in other domains, as a form of unfolding or uncompression, or somebody says decrypting. We are very much used to do concepts like this because, for instance, the same I mean, if we go back to the domain of biology, we know that the same information that you can find in the parent seed of a man, you can find it then in a baby, let's say. There is a function, a magic function, which is the woman, that performs this miracle of the cellular development. So, and builds, unfolds, cycle by cycle, let's say, the cellular system that encompasses, that constitutes a man. The same happens with the Grundgestalt. You have this musical seed, and then you have some form of unfolding or uncompression that derives the entire music. And this lecture is all about these forms of unfolding, let's say. Okay, so a question first, but why I choose this word? It's because it's the word that Schönberg used in his famous paper of 1915, in which he said, whatever happens in a piece of music, and he was referring, of course, to decaphonic music or a special type of music, is the endless reshaping of a basic form. And in fact, he says there is nothing in a piece of music but what comes from the theme, springs from it, and can be traced back to it. And to put it still more severely, if there is nothing but the theme itself. So I was reading once more The Fold by Gilles Deleuze these days to prepare for this presentation, and it was full of references that were like another way to rephrase the same concept, like this one, the extrinsic creation of the material of the musical score from cause to cause. Why this is important to me, I will explain it in a few slides, but this is a divertissement, let's say. So please allow me to introduce something like a joke. So if you push this to the limit, then you get what Frank Zappa called the big note. Basically, there's two characters in a famous album of Frank Zappa, when Monica says, are you trying to tell me that this whole universe revolves around one note? And the other character, Spider, says, no, it doesn't revolve around it. That's what it is. The universe, it's one note. And as a joke, I refer to Zappa, but in fact is something which comes back to, can be traced back to ideas from Leibniz. You see, after less than 10 minutes, I start talking about Leibniz, Deleuze, and yeah. And you can even find it in Sikhism. I will show you, I will let you listen to a track. The title of the track refers exactly to this property of universal development from a single element. So what do I mean by Grundgestalt model? It's the way you create a Grundgestalt in practice. This is, of course, a generative process. Of course, you have to choose one. I think that the one that is very natural is the one of dynamic system. You have an input element, and then you apply a function to the input. Then you take the output, and if the output is still in the domain of the function, you reapply it again and again and again and again. And basically what you do is you transform each of these elements, which are called orbits, into musical elements. And sometimes you can find that, for instance, Fn is equal to f of f, let's say. Then you have a loop. And this is called a cycle in dynamic systems. And this would mean that you get an infinite music, because you start repeating the music on and on. So this is a process, let's say, that practically transforms a seed into something else and realizes, makes it real, the concept which is already in the seed. I wrote in here, it is the continuation or the extension of its act, again from The Fold by Deleuze. So all these ideas, if you're interested in them, you can continue reading them in this paper in here. Okay, so the idea is in fact much older than even Schönberg or the Sikhism, the Sikh religion, and so forth. If you look at, for instance, esoteric Buddhism, there you have this concept of the true world, the Shingon, and even earlier, before the Buddhism in Japan, they had Shinto, and they had a similar concept called Kotodama. So this can go back perhaps even further. But the general idea is that you have a central concept, for instance, the Buddha, and from it you derive something by applying some function, for instance, meditation, spiritual practice, and so forth. And then you continue with the process, and then you continue with the process, and then you generate something. For instance, the pupil becomes the Buddha. And this is called the one world mandala. The mandala is exactly this process, which transforms or shows the way to transform to somebody. And I find the name of the mandala in here very interesting, because it combines the biological aspect and also the universal aspect. This is the one world mandala created by Kukai, the creator of the Japan esoteric Buddhism. If you're interested in this, you can read more into this post where I talk about esoteric Buddhism and the Grundgestalt. Or even if you know Italian, there is this book by Professor Raveri. This book is fantastic. It's really enlightening. Okay, so what do I mean by my little Grundgestalten? These are music compositions that are based on this idea of the model of Schoenberg. I really don't know how Schoenberg, without computers, without the ease that we have today, was able to create such a model. Clearly a wonderful genius. But nowadays it's quite easy to apply that concept, because you just have to choose an F and an input, and then you can mechanically derive elements of data that you can interpret in some way in music. So what I did is at first I did the science part. I started studying this, applying different types of F to different inputs and doing that, this kind of things. Then later, I started a little bit the art part. I started assembling and organizing the musical matter. I started doing compositions interpreted in a different way, like Lego pieces, starting composing elements at the genotype level, at the phenotype level, so the musical matter produced by the seed, or even the pieces of the seed itself. And what follows, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna summarize several steps of this ongoing journey, let's say, and maybe, hopefully a future journey, because I plan to apply COT and also apply other techniques like starting not from the concept of notes and music, but really doing sound processing, so working with frequencies. Okay, let's go to a first case. A first F, which I tried, was very simple. It was a permutation of a string. So it is possible to consider this process, the process that converts a number into the next permutation in a set of ordered permutation, as a dynamic system. I studied the problem in here, and also you can find more information in this paper, which is called Permutation Numbers, and it was published in Wolfram's Complex Systems. I also created a software you can play with. You can, if you're interested, you can compile it and do some experiments yourself. So the idea is that you have this F, which is a function which takes a string, for instance, 0002223, and then creates, derives from this input the next permutation, for instance, 000223233. Okay, and then you reapply it again, and you apply it again, and apply it again, and so forth. And if you like, you can even define the last plus one element as the first. And in this way, you introduce artificially a loop. Like in music, you start playing from here to here. In fact, I'm talking about playing because the substrings here are interpreted as notes. For instance, you can divide the string into 3 chunks and then convert them into music. And okay, this is how it looks like. You have the string. The string is converted into data. The data is converted into a musical representation, which is a lily pond. The lily pond source is translated into MIDI. And the MIDI is converted with a tool called timidity into sound. And if you want to listen to this, I can. Of course, this is a very simple case. So it's a very first. Okay, I think it's more or less clear that this is a very first example, let's say. So very simple. If you have access to my presentation, the source code of my presentation, then you can also download these elements if you're interested. But let's go back now to, let me see. Yeah, to the discussion. If you take exactly that number, that string 000222333, you can also convert it not in sound, but actually in music. And in this case, in a 3D graph. And the nice thing is that this is how it looks like. And it's a fractal graph. I measured the fractal dimension of this picture, and indeed I proved that with high probability it should be a fractal entity. Also, if the digits that constitute the strings are interpreted as roles in a multi-agent system, then this is the representation of all the possible agents that can be fired by a condition. And if you consider this graph as a dynamic system, and you turn on the sub-teams that are activated by the different conditions that take place over time, then you will have something like a light show in which different parts of the agents are activated, and you create I call it a response team light show. Okay, but the most important thing here, let me just see if I can, yeah. It's what I call the genotypical property, the expansion property. So if you consider this gene, which is constituted by 7 zeros and then these numbers, and then you add a few zeros on top here, you see that, okay, as the gene, the left gene is included, is a subset in terms of symbol of the second gene. At the same time, also the set of points here is a subset of the points on the right, of the set of points on the right. So it's like there is a conservation of modularity. And yeah, this gives me the feeling that a richer gene creates a concept which is closer to the real concept, the ideal concept, which is the one which goes to infinity. Okay, so if you want to have more information about this, you can have a look at these papers in here. But yeah, much more satisfactory F was the second one I started with. So if I want to describe it, it's again a string, and again I make use of next permutation of this simple function, but then I hand the output to what I call Heartquake here. I will explain in a moment what I mean. This is basically a game, a deterministic game, which is known also by the name Beggar My Neighbors, or in Italian it's called Strappacuore. It's a game that is played with a pack of cards. You basically distribute the cards. Hello? Can you hear me? Is there a problem?
We just heard somebody.
Ah, okay.
I don't know who it was, maybe.
Okay, it's useful because I have also a feedback, because sometimes I think I'm talking to myself.
No, we're there.
Okay, so as I was telling you, this is a deterministic game. You take some cards, you give them to two opponents, and then the opponents have to exchange. I mean, the cards are unknown to both, but they are uncovered one by one. The cards are divided into types of cards. There are the bad cards that do not change the state of the game, and there are the good cards that jeopardize the other your opponent. So when you extract a good card, your opponent has a number of chances to respond with a good card. Otherwise, he loses the cards on the table, the cards that are being accumulated on the table. So what I do is I take this string, I consider the next permutation of the string, and then I consider the string as a pack of cards. I give it to Heartquake, and I play the game. And the state of the game are then played in music. This is how it looks like. So you have the two opponents in here. For instance, here you have a pack of cards, which is only of 10 cards, and you have 0 cards, which are the cards that are bad cards, and the 1 cards that are the good cards. And these are the cards owned by the left opponent, and these are the cards owned by the right opponent, and each of them can be interpreted as a number, for instance, a binary number, because we have only 0 and 1s in here. And then you can turn the numbers into notes and play them at the same time. Okay, this is perhaps more interesting okay, because it's a more complicated, more complex function. So it is perhaps likely to provide us with more interesting results. Also from the point of view of music, and that's the case actually. But it is also interesting because it's a game, so there is an intrinsic goal directedness here. So there is an intrinsic goal because the two opponents wants to win. So you can also model your input here in order to understand how the goal evolves, or maybe you can see how the music tells you when the fate of the game change. The fates of the game. Okay, so it is indeed a more complex function because it's actually structured like this. You have the component at time k+1, which is dependent on 2 functions at time at the previous time. And there is a system of equation here, which I call the Heartquake system. So we have, again, X is the input, but the F is both this delta and this omega here. So I can show you a first example here. Let me go to this one. It is very, very long. With a seed like this, you can get compositions that are very long. I just extracted a piece from an excerpt of the track, but it's just to give you an idea. It's not very artistic, let's say, but it is much more how to say it, unexpected, at least to my ear. There is always a subjective aspect to these things, but it is, to me at least, more undeterministic what happens to the music with respect to the previous formulation, with the previous F. Okay, and then at this point, I really started playing a little bit with this toy which I had created. So I started assigning MIDI tracks to various sampled instruments. Also, for instance, assigning to instruments that had an incomplete sampling, like percussions that were distributed not according to a musical arrangement. Or I created Synochronous, which is basically overlapping two compositions that had nothing to do with one another, or doing pseudo randomness, or a perturbation of the input. I bit flipped the string to see what happened to the composition, to the message. Would it be affected or not, were the questions that I posed to myself. And also I started breaking down and rearranging both the audio chunks and also the genes. I understood that, for instance, to get a sound effect which lasted longer, I could add some elements to the genotype. So I artificially did this because I wanted to create a certain effect, for instance. Or I brutally affected the phenotype by cutting it into chunks and rearranging it and so forth. In a sense, this is a new type of composition, in the sense that instead of working with sounds, or instead of working with notes, which are a higher construct with respect to sound, you work with a greater granularity, a greater musical quantum, which is this module at genotype or phenotype level. Okay, the first example is a phenotypic manipulation. This is called Studio Z. I wrote it on the anniversary of the birth of Frank Zappa. Yeah, I'm very fond of Frank Zappa too. And this is what I did with the track. I did some changes. You can see here that I took the bass line, which is basically the track of the first player. I showed you before. Let me just go back. Yes, here you have the first player, the cards on the table, and the second player. So here the bass was the first player. I chose to assign the bass to the first player. Okay, I took the first seconds of the line and I repeated 27 times. And I played all the rest together with it. And I assigned three voices, the three voices to flutes, diatto, harpsichord, Latin percussion. Then I did some changes here. For instance, I raised the bass by 8 decibel. And I also did some tricks like silencing some segments to highlight some parts. And this is what it looks like. Or what you see is the graphical representation of the system, rendered with portrait light tracing, and putting the camera farther and farther from the object. So this is another example. It's yeah, I considered all the possible games that you can have using these digits, these cards, if you want, and I selected randomly 64 games, and this is how it looks like, the result. just to give you an idea. Let's say this is yet another experiment. It was yeah, an attempt, a failed attempt, in fact, to try and measure. I mean, from a musical point of view, what happens in the Heartquake game when you change the fate of the game. So I distributed the good cards in an unfair way. First, I handed them to the first opponent. All to the first opponent would win immediately, and then little by little, I started distributing them to the other to the second player. So in this track, in a sense, you are listening to a number of card games. At the beginning is the first player who is going to win, and at the end is the second player. But yeah, and in the middle, the fates are more balanced and the games last longer. But actually, I couldn't listen to a very clear difference. So I have to study more. Means future in Japanese. Okay, let me just go to the next one. Then I did the other experiments, of course. For instance, in Synochronous, I took the two functions, F1, the next permutation, and the Heartquake one, and I applied it to different related inputs. I took the string caged cage here. Then I considered the letters lexicographically ordered, A, C, C, D, E, E, G, G. And I did all the possible permutations from this, considering A as the zero card, so and the other as good cards. Also I played Heartquake between caged cage and the last permutation. Yeah, you can listen to the results here, but okay, I would prefer to let you listen to something more interesting. For instance, this one is a Suwara, is a pseudo-random, again, pseudo-random. The interesting thing is that I played this time with the original Strappacuore, with the original Heartquake game. So you have 40 cards, and you have the aces, the 2 and the 3, that are good cards, and all the others, the 4, the 5, the 6, etc., are bad cards. So they are all zero cards in here. I generate a number of samples, and then I play them. And then I also did some selection on the phenotypical selection. So I just cut the output into chunks. I derived two versions of the song, one with symbol and then another one without and with. And then I assembled them according to this structure. And this is how it looks like. It's very long, so we'll skip let me go now to this one. Is also an example of random games from a selection of games pseudo-randomly chosen among the possible ones with this pack of cards, and also of manual reassembling. This is called teleology. Let me now go to the next one. For this one, as a strange title, COT Uparjana Terai Ang. I hope that my pronunciation is not too bad. It means in millions of universes are the limbs of his being. And it's one of the verses of the Guru Granth Sahib, the holy book of the Sikhish religion. It means basically that this is yet another way to refer to the concept of a seed generating the universe. This being is one, and millions of universes spring from it and constitute its material essence, which I interpret in this presentation as its geometrical and musical representation. Also interesting is that, the word here, COT, has nothing to do with the koto, which I mentioned before, but it's even a different word for the instrument koto, but it's the same. It made me think of this concept of the Kotodama, which is the soul word, the word from which everything stems out of. Okay, this is for double bass, koto, African mallets, Chinese percussion, and sitar. And here I did the same type of manipulations that I mentioned before. So, for instance, at the end, I only left one of the voices to highlight, to put on the foreground several aspects. It doesn't. Yeah. Okay. This one is the one that I personally prefer. It's called Kaidan. It's divided into 4 parts. The first one, it's called Seibu, which means voice. And this is basically bassoon and English horn playing the part that corresponds to the first player only. So these are the cards that are on the pack of the first player of a Heartquake game. Again, you can see the geometrical representation of the same concepts. And the manipulations that you know. And this one is the fourth part, which is called jazz. So the same elements are reproduced, but now you have also the cards on the other player and the cards on the table. The piano plays the players' cards. A double bass only plays the opponent, let's say the second player, while drums plays all the cards. You see that there is a tempo, right? But I did not specify a tempo. This is emerging from the game. And this is one of the most interesting things that I found in my journey. What I did is, if a note is identified by the function and it's equal to the previous note, then I prolong it. And this introduces this rhythmic elements. Yes, and that is Kaidan. This is another description of what I just mentioned to you. So you have the games that is described by a change of state here, and here. And basically the first track was only this light blue cards played one after the other. And if a note is the same as the previous one, you prolong the note, you don't play it again, and you see a theme appearing, a voice appearing. And yeah, this is the complete description in here. Right, and these are the full set of games. So this that you can see here is the full track, 7 minutes and etc. It's this compact form. Okay, and the last track that I would like to let you listen to, it's called the La Cuica. I also wrote a number of compositions. I mean, I don't know if I can actually say that I wrote, because it's the music, it's the algorithm who wrote them. I did this process, I led this process of recomposition, let's say. But I wrote a series of pieces based on, yeah, all related to this famous composition of poetry. Yeah, Japanese, of course. And then I also did one, yeah, devoted to a manga by Oshimi Shuzo called Le Fleur du Mal. And I also have a blog with a detailed explanation of the tracks in here. And I have a Bandcamp here. Okay, so in conclusion, I showed you this way that I'm going through also to this moment, in which I had a gradual shift of interests from the science part to the art part. And the most interesting thing that I found along the way was the natural emergence of these musical concepts like rhythm, something that I did not anticipate and something I did not inject or design, and it was there. And the future, of course, I wanted to try with the COT and see if it has a formulation that can be comparable to this one, or maybe I can go for other models. It could be also not necessarily Grundgestalten. And I want to work with frequencies, not with notes, and use a super collider or C sound or some other tool. I want to do some further experiments in meaning, identity, and goal directedness. And I want to play a lot with this kind of things. I want to do hybrid Grundgestalten, like the one that I presented and was selected for by the person, the selector of Rock Werchter. I want to write a paper about this kind of things. Also, maybe to compose a soundtrack, it will be very nice. And my dream is to have not just computer music, but to have this for a real orchestra. Maybe also for dancers. It would be wonderful. And of course, my dream is also to collaborate with you. I really hope to have this opportunity. So let me conclude just by showing you two pictures. This is again the One World mandala. And I liked to put, yeah, to let it fade into this other mandala, which is the very first string which I used, represented as yeah, represented geometrically. And also this one, which is 0 1 1 1 1 2. And I wanted to show you this one together with this unfolded version. And that is it. And I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to talk to you about these things. And I'm very glad now to try and reply to your questions.
Well, thank you, Vincenzo, for your talk.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
I think we are all, I mean, I am impressed. I was expecting to be this impressed when I saw first the slides. So I wonder now what the other participants of this seminar think, or if you have questions, and plenty of questions, but I guess the audience has priority.
Okay.
So please let us know on the chat if you want to talk, so I can direct the question round. So you drop a line on the chat, and then I will pick names one by one in the order appearing in the chat.
Okay.
Just type me, and then I will know who was typing.
Thomas, can I start maybe?
Sure, sure.
Because I have to sort out how the chat works because I'm not used to Zoom. So, Vincenzo,
Okay. So whoever has questions can just speak then, because maybe it's too complicated what I just said. So we will sort it out.
Great, Vincenzo. Thank you very much for your inspiring talk and your inspiring work. I have three things. It's one thing I want to mention, and I have two questions. One thing I want to mention is I'm sure you know it, that the concept of Grundgestalt, that this is very similar to the composition principle of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen.
Stockhausen, yes.
Yes, the formal composition, the formula composition. Well, this I've found, I just want to mention it. I find it very interesting, the connections there and the way he sets it up, the Grundgestalt within the seed of a melody, and from there to expand it to a complete composition, like Mantra was the first one. Which is great. And the other thing is, which also where I also was thinking about Stockhausen was your idea with rhythm, and I guess you know it too, that he had this idea that a single tone is already a rhythm because it oscillates, and this I find very interesting. So to get a rhythm that you think that you think not here's the rhythm and there is the melody, but that a single note has already rhythm into it. In its Gestalt, which I found very intriguing.
Yeah. It made me, now you made me think of the big note that I mentioned at the beginning, the Zappa big note that oscillates and derives the whole universe.
Yeah. The second thing is a question I have. When you have this in the first example you did show, where you have a string of numbers, and I just want to know, and you map each number to a note. Did I get that right? Did I understand?
I consider a string, for instance, of 9 characters, and then the 9 characters are digits, and I consider positions. So positions from 0, 1, and 2, I map them to one note. 3, 4, and 5 to second note, 6, 7, and 8 to third note.
Okay. I got it. And if you say note, it's already a Gestalt, so that you have already decided what the duration is of this note and what is the pitch and the dynamics. And
the thing is, it's indeed a predefined choice to rely on notes. I could have mapped these numbers into frequencies, for instance, but what I did is I arbitrarily chose to assign these numbers to consecutive, notes, and the duration is always one beat, but it's modified by the past note. If the past note is the same, I let it last longer. Okay. So if the note is for instance, if you would never change the note, and the mapping would always result in a C, for instance, then you would have a C lasting as the entire piece.
Okay, I see. Great.
Yes. So the emergence of the rhythm is due to this property. So I do not inject any, my only choice is the tempo, let's say. I decide that for this particular track and the way I mapped it to the sound fonts, I will go 140 beats, for instance. And then all the rest is derived by the functions. And this idea that if the note is the same, I prolong it. And what I get is the rhythms that we have, for instance, in jazz or in other type of music that we are used to know. And in the end, the question that I ask myself is this something that the human being has created, or is the mathematics behind the system has created it? And so it is mankind that has introduced music, or it has discovered music in a sense, and all the structures that we call and we use now. And my idea is that is the latter.
Okay. And my last question is, or just an idea, if I don't know if you remember my talk, I was talking about the repertoire. And so I asked myself if I would describe your approach with the idea of repertoire. Is it right that you have two subsets within the repertoire set? The one is the basic shape, and the other subset is a pool of functions you apply to the basic shape.
Exactly. It is absolutely important when the accent is always put, for instance, by Schoenberg or other on the seed, because of course it's nice, but there is an implicit important element, which is the function. Yeah. If you want to be correct, it's a couple: function plus seed. Only then you can. It's like in esoteric Buddhism. They had these sounds, the mantra. You mentioned Stockhausen. It is not by chance that he used the term mantra. And these mantra are the shingon. In Japanese, the translation of mantra is shingon. So the true word, which is to be emitted. And from that, you have the revelation. You know how to become the Buddha. But it's not just the shingon, it's not just the mantra, it's also the tradition, the function. So you have to know how to pronounce it. And there is a very detailed description of this, of how this must be done. So you cannot improvise yourself a Buddha.
Vincenzo, great. Thanks a lot.
This is my pleasure. Thank you very much for your questions.
Who wants to come next? Anybody? Please take the word. No, Diederik, don't you have something to say? I assume you might want to say something. Or
I enjoyed very much the music.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I'm still reflecting.
I left you all speechless.
Okay. I would like to know, Vincenzo, how you do the mapping to the three-dimensional points. Like I'm really impressed by the music and all that, like as everyone, but still I don't get clear how these mappings function. So if because let me explain the mistake I might be having. I see a very short string, and then I hear a very long piece of music.
Yes.
So if you attribute to three elements of this string to be a note, then I will be left with very little notes. So then I don't get how the thing goes for so long. What piece am I missing?
As I was discussing,
and also how to represent in space.
Yeah, I was discussing with Christian that it's not just the seed, it's the function, as how the string is modified. So let's start with
I
one
didn't
string.
get exactly that, yeah.
No problem at all.
Now I understand.
How do I get the geometrical representation? It's the same as the music. You take the string, for instance, 9 characters, and I divide it into 3 chunks. The first chunk is character 0, 1, 2, then 3, 4, 5, then 6, 7, 8. Then I
And
consider the elements as digits, and I
Mhm.
convert them, and I assign them to X, Y, Z.
So that gives you 100 possibilities per
This gives you
per point.
This gives you one possibility, but then it gives you, when you go to the next permutation and the
Yeah,
next one, you get another point. So you get as many as there are permutation.
yeah,
So it is the n factorial times m factorial times and so forth. How many chunks
yeah.
you have, they become points
But if you
or
have,
nodes.
if you assign to three digits, one,
Yes.
like let's say one semantic, one thing, one point or one sound or something, and you have 0 to 9 is 10 times 0 to 9, it's another 10 times 0 to 9, it's another 10. So you have a thousand, sorry, 10, 10, 10, 1,000 possibilities to start, like 1,000 fundamental nodes,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it?
I'm not sure that I understand correctly. So this is like numbers in a certain base.
Mm-hmm.
So
In like 0 to 9, isn't it? It's that what you use, or 0
no,
to
for
0
instance,
to 1?
to give you the example, in my presentation, I had 000, 222, 323. So
Mm-hmm.
the biggest number, the biggest digit is 3. So I
Ah,
use
okay.
a base 4
Base 4.
to represent the numbers. The minimum number is a triplet constituted of 000. And that's 0. The biggest number is
It's 444.
444.
So
And this is
then you have
the maximum that you can have in your notes or in your
60.
3D coordinates. But you have 3 of them. So the freedom to choose is constrained by the fact that the digits must be always the same. So you have only 3 zeros, 3 2, and 3 3.
Mm-hmm.
If you combine in all the possible ways this, you get this 3D set of points, and I use them as the center of a circle or of a square, of a unitary radius or unitary side, and then I portray it.
Yeah.
And this is what I get, to my surprise.
Yeah.
And if
Because
you play it, you get that music.
I was wondering also on the way you explain rhythm emergence, like, but you have said twice again, like the same, that you, when you get the same, let's say, code, you just repeat, you don't stop and play again because it's the same. So
Yes,
that's
yes, I
basically,
prolong it.
and that's something that if all will be just pure random, it will not happen much. But it is because of the symmetry, or so the conservative properties of the function.
Yeah.
It's what I guess that tends to bring the high chance for notes to repeat in certain patterns that end up creating rhythm.
Yes.
Is that the case?
Yes, it all
Yeah.
depends on the function and
Mm.
the moment you are in. For instance, if you are using this very first, very simple next permutation, then you change very much the 3 bits, the 3 elements at the rightmost side, and the
Yeah.
one on the leftmost do not change very much. So you get one voice that does not change very much, and one which changes continuously. So one of the voices at the beginning, it results in a continuous note, which I assigned to bass, and it does this double bass, and you get this that creates like something like a foundation. And when you keep on generating the orbits of the dynamic system, the things swap. The bits in the permutation yeah, the movement of the bits go leftward. And then you get notes that are changing more rapidly on the leftmost voice, and the opposite. So it's something that creates an effect that you can clearly identify, and it's not very artistic, let's say. So that's why this is not a good function to use. Much more interesting was the second one, the Heartquake, because then you take this function, you divide it into two parts. You interpret them as a pack of cards, and you play it, and you get many states from the game, and each of these states is played.
Yeah.
Becomes an element of music.
So, well, I will continue until someone else wants to talk. Okay, Felix. Yeah, because I can continue for very long. Okay, Felix.
Hello, Vincenzo. Thank you for
Hi,
your
Felix.
lecture. It was very interesting. I especially like it really solved me a couple of problems I was having with my own working process.
Oh, really?
But I do have problems with your mapping, actually. That's one of my main problems, especially with people coming from the science and going into arts, is the mapping. Because for me, everything has to do with the mapping. I mean, using, for example, MIDI, it's like, I don't know, it's like having Newtonian physics, and in the back you're using like Einstein physics. You understand what you're playing with the randomness. You're playing with systems that are very complicated and very interesting, and their emergency happening all the time, but you are not applying those systems to the basic of music, that's rhythm, for example. What happens if you apply the same system to the rhythm? Because you're the way I see it, and it's with a lot of love, you are trying to make music. And the way I see it is, I don't try to make music. I try to do something that overblows my head. You know, that it goes beyond the concept of music. I'm coming from the Senati school, so it's like how you do something that you don't expect to be anything, and you just want to make sense. Like, I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about. It's
Yes,
like,
yes.
whether you're playing the rhythm or what, or for example, in the timbre. I did once a piece with the MIDI, and I put the random things on the instruments. I have a huge synthesizer, and the system will be like jumping from one instrument to another, creating a semi-chaotic system. But I don't know why you're trying to pick these very complex systems and put them in MIDI. And maybe you're right. You have to go to Super Collider and start experimenting with micro tunings, and because I think what you're doing is amazing. It's beautiful and has a lot of power, but it's lacking this concept of getting more like in the 21st century, like micro tuning, for example. Micro tuning is such a big world, and it's like going with tiny frequencies that will match each other, will combine, unite, repel. So it's the same concept you're using, but somehow for me it gets down. Doesn't show the power because of the MIDI.
No, but I understand and I agree with you. But this is a set of experiments, let's say, that I wanted to conduct. First of all, to understand whether the material that I would derive would have some. Yeah, it's like a Turing test, no? I wanted to check whether the interpretation of the output from the point of view of a human being accustomed to certain ideas, certain concepts, etc., would have accepted, would be such that this kind of elaboration would be considered as music. And to my surprise, in some cases, I found people that, found this as nice music, let's say. And this is a very first step, because then I can apply. I mean, you know, when I was studying double bass, I wanted to rush and play jazz. You know, I wanted to immediately do the jazzy stuff. But my teacher was always saying, no, take the bow, get in front of the mirror, and do do, and things like this. So in a sense, I understand that, because if you go immediately to the microtonal exploration and stuff like this, and you don't get there in a second step, I think you might lose the opportunity to value the material that you're dealing with. It is my arbitrary starting point, because if I start playing immediately jazz music on the double bass, my teacher would tell me, then you don't hear the mistakes. If you do it in this other way, it can be boring, but then you will be more you will master the tones, and this is one of the things that led me to using a grammar which was very simple. But I'm very much aware that there is a lot of predefined arbitrary assumptions that lead towards a traditional interpretation of the concept of music. And I don't want to stuck to that. One of my dream would be to collaborate with you and learn from you, Christian, and I mean, the people that really do the most interesting things, right? And learn how maybe this work of mine could lead to interpretations that have more sense. But I wanted first to explore it more with the traditional grammar.
Perfect.
I have perhaps a question that comments on that also a little bit. I understand very much well your reasoning, and I kind of agree with it. You see, music is not noise. So there is something which is really music, I think. It's not just noise. I think we agree about that. And so finding this definition, of course, can be far away from classical conception of music and closer by, but recognizing when something is still music or when it becomes noise, that seems to be the most challenging thing in all this, I think.
Yes.
If you take a tape recorder and you go to a waterfall and you tape the noise made by the water, it's not music, I think.
No. But
I don't know.
Elements.
Diederik, I don't know. I think, I mean, this is the John Cage thing, that 433 is exactly that everything which happens when the piano player is not playing is music, which means that...
But I would not agree with Cage on that.
Yeah, that's okay. But what I want to say is, that what is noise and what not depends on you interacting with the sound source. You know what I mean? And so it depends on the conceptualization you have in your mind.
Yeah, but I think the answer is not known yet. There is a real investigation to do on the question, what is music? In my opinion, we have not answered that, you see? Of course, I do think that Pythagoras had to say something about that all in the beginning. And it's perhaps not an accident that the speaker of today, I see him nodding. Huh? Because I do think that Pythagoras really had to say something all in the beginning, you see. When the tones were invented and the fractions played a role in it, in harmonics and so on and so on. Not saying that this is the perfect definition already of what is music, yeah? Mm-hmm. But there is this. Stan is not here, I think, at the moment. I once had an interesting discussion with Stan, and he knew more about that. But there is some idea even that music would have come before speech. It's a funny idea, actually, but it could be even true. I think that if you go to our ancestors a long time ago, that they might have sung before they spoke, you see, to communicate. And Stan gave me some hints that there is some investigation of our how could you call that in English? The thing in our throat that we used to speak with, that there would be some reasons to think, there would be some reasons to think that music might have been first. So that if that an opera might be a more ancient thing than the way we speak now, you see. And so I do think that it's an interesting question to try to answer. What is when is something music? I don't think it will be a very. It's actually going to all. When is something science? You see, there's also a question we have no answer yet for. But not anything is science. And I think
isn't it a question of like? It's not really a question of, for me, whether a waterfall is noise or a waterfall is music. It's a question of what I, as the listener, get from the experience of listening to the waterfall. I might get nothing from it. It might be meaningless to me, or I might have an amazing poetic experience. It depends what it opens up in me. It's not really like the relations of the frequencies or the notes themselves. It's what I'm able to get from the experience and the way that the sounds are arranged or found. Yeah, of course, it has an influence on what I'm able to get from it. But ultimately, it's about what I'm able to get, right? So for me, my question about today's talk was,
Can I answer just
sure, go on.
But not to interrupt you, but I would not be satisfied with that answer. But that's me, yeah?
Okay.
And now I let you talk because...
So for me, what I was wondering about, I found myself, when I was listening to the compositions today, I found myself being really asking myself, or being busy with really listening to the choices that had been made to translate the kind of the output data stream of the various games and systems that had been made, and then to translate or to map that into music. I found that what I was mostly listening to was the choices that had been made to do in order to make that translation. So the time intervals between the notes, the instruments that have been chosen, the fact whether they're MIDI instruments or not MIDI instruments, I don't really mind what instruments they are, but what I was 90% or 99% of what I was listening to was actually the choices that were being made during the translation. So I couldn't, for example, myself hear the card game that was being played. I couldn't hear how the card game was being played. I couldn't hear someone winning. I couldn't hear someone losing. I couldn't actually extract from the music any information about that system, because the system had been transferred into just a data stream, and the data stream had been arbitrarily transferred into something that sounds like music. So that's what so for me, in that sense, it's not really, it doesn't matter to me whether it sounds like music. I thought I could perfectly enjoy listening to it. But what I couldn't get was some access to the system that was bubbling away underneath. And for me, that's the really interesting part, is how can the music itself give me a new way of accessing those systems which are bubbling away underneath. And so that's what I would like to know, is how, what I would like to know actually, if Vincenzo, maybe that's just my ear, and maybe I need to learn more and adjust my ear.
No.
Is there a way to hear how the game is being played in the composition?
It is certainly a problem. The fact that what you actually listened to was not a game, but it was a series of games. So the seed that I used was an initial string. The string was permutated, and each permutation became an initial point for the game, for a game. And you listened to the states of that game, and then the next one, and then the next one. So it is not the information that you tried to interpret as one game was a collection of games. What I could do is start with one game, a very long one, and one of the questions that I asked myself about the original game was whether it ended up in loops or not, because I never knew this. And then concentrate on one element, and then I can start trying to understand. But what you thought it was one game was actually a series of games, and this means that you cannot find in it the progress that you sought.
But can I learn something about the series of games then through listening to the music?
Yeah.
Can I learn anything about the game?
Yes. You can, for instance, inject. One of my experiments was exactly trying to see what happens when you play tricks with the cards. So instead of choosing completely at random the packs that you distribute, you give good packs first to one player and then to the other. And one of the things that I wanted to listen to was how the message, the musical message, would be changed. But this, I did one experiment only, and it didn't give me a good result. I could not hear very much this change of fate, because what I wanted was exactly see, for instance, how do you call it when you play a trick with cards where you're not fair? Okay, I don't know the English term, but I wanted to play like the god in distributing the cards, and facilitate first. I mean, give all the chances to win to one player first, and then little by little change this fate and give all the chances to win to the second player. And this goal-directedness, I tried to mimic by changing the distribution of the good cards artificially.
I would like to, I think this is we are at an important point, what Felix pointed out and what Orion did point out. Orion, when you say, when I get you right, that you would like to hear the game, which is played with a string, and this is overlapped by the surface of the MIDI sounds to which this process is mapped. It's maybe a little bit, you can compare it with the situation we are right now, because we can't see the strings and the functions that produce the zoom thing. I see your faces, and I can't tell from the interface of the computer the strings and the functions that are generating it. And it's a bit similar to the problem that was pointed out to serial music in the 50s, which led you can, well, this is one theory. You can say that serial music led to minimal music, because in minimal music you can hear exactly the structure. You can hear the structure. You can hear it, you know, and the structure that produces or generates serial music, like, so here we are again with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen or Geuwerts in Belgium. You have Geuwerts, the composer, who was doing serial music. I think you can compare it a bit, because you have the mathematical process, but you can't hear the process in the outcome. And this was a big discussion in music, that you can't. And this was also what Cage, as a trickster, played with. That he said, you have all these complicated mathematical formulas in serial music, and I give you a random piece, and it sounds exactly to our ears the same. You can't tell the highly organized, the highly organized mathematical process. You can't tell if this is a highly mathematical organized process or if it is pure randomness. This was one of the big things in the early 60s, and so, I think and I think so. If I try to break it down to my repertoire thing, what I was talking to Vincenzo before, so that we say we have, as a repertoire, we have the basic shape, which is a string, and then we have a pool of functions we apply to these strings. We have even more in this repertoire, which is the mapping to the instruments, and this is another dimension we have to look at, and we have to count in, and how this mapping, which is also another function, of course, or another pool of functions, leads to, I don't know how to explain it makes not transparent so it makes the mathematical process opaque. Yes.
Well, when you build a I'm curious to also open the question this way. So when we build a model or something, if you're a scientist and you want to build models of systems in order to try to understand the rules of the model, or maybe you're trying to understand a system from nature, and so you try to extract the rules through observation, and then you build a model in order to, and hopefully that the model that you build will have some of the same characteristics as this living system, right? So then you have an idea if you're somehow going along the right way of thinking about these rules or so on. So you build the model in order that you can see the functioning of the system in the output. That's what gives you, it's what gives the model value. Is that you can see or /hear the functioning of the system in the output. If you took the output of a model about you were modeling, I don't know, stigmergy in ants, and then you took all these units of square pixels moving around like ants, and then you transposed them arbitrarily into, I don't know, other sounds or other vegetables, or like pictures of faces, and there was no real relationship with the ants themselves, and you made a movement that way into a sound that went, a different dimension, you would lose all the meaning in the model that you were trying to extract. Well, let me not get so, let me not go talk about get so distracted talking about changing the model. But the point is that you want to extract information from the model, right? So this is a question. So if the idea here in this kind of overall project is to build a sonic model of chemical organization theory, then firstly, is that the idea? And then is it important then that you can hear the structure of chemical organization theory in what you hear at the end, or not? Can it also just produce like a string of data that you can't really hear the structure of the underlying theory within it?
I would like to
Francis,
intervene
please.
because,
Yeah.
because we are speaking about whether you hear structures in music. And I would even want to expand it to structures in art and structures in science. And what I'm more and more understanding now from the recent brain models is the brain is constantly searching for this kind of what I call patterns. Patterns that are to some degree predictive, but to some degree random. So I think one of the things that confuses lots of people is that they tend to think if it's a model or if there is a theory or if there is a structure, you should be able to reconstruct exactly that structure so that you can exactly predict. But most things in nature are not of that. Most things in nature, they are predictable to some degree, but like you watch the leaves in a tree that move in the wind, you can't predict exactly how the leaves would move, but you know that there are certain regularities in there. The one leaf from the right of the tree will not suddenly appear on the left of the tree while the tree on the right moves to the left. So there are regularities in it, but regularities that are more subtle. And that is what the brain is good at, finding these kind of subtle regularities that are to some degree predictable, to some degree unpredictable. If it's purely predictable, it gets boring. If it's purely unpredictable, it's also boring. It's this mixture of predictability and unpredictability. And that's also what makes music, I think, and what makes art. And things like fractals, the more interesting fractals have a regularity in there because they are generated according to an algorithm. And the brain picks up that there is a regularity, but the brain cannot exactly reconstruct the fractal, just like the brain cannot exactly reconstruct the game that Vincenzo has used to produce his music, but the brain implicitly finds that there is some kind of a structure in there. And the fact that there is some structure and is to some degree predictable is what creates the meaning. So in that sense, what Orion was saying about meaning is very important. And I use the term sense making in cognitive science. The brain is constantly trying to make sense from the impulses. But sense making does not necessarily mean mapping it onto something specific that you recognize and that what you know what it is. Sense making also means getting some grasp of what are the things you can expect and what are the things you cannot expect. So instead of prediction, I prefer this concept of expectation. Within a certain music, you expect certain sounds. And if then suddenly a sound appears that you do not expect, it's a dissonance. So part of like the rules of harmony or of rhythm is that there is a certain predictability. There are certain things that you can expect, and then there are certain things you cannot expect. And it's this subtle interplay between predictable things, expectable things, and things that do not belong that creates the structure that the brain recognizes, and that makes it beautiful. There is this nice paper that Sander van de Kruis wrote, who also gave a presentation for the art science group a while ago. That is that with this predictive processing theory of the brain, he was explaining the beauty of art by the fact that art produces a pattern that is not immediately predictable, but where the brain extracts the pleasure from trying to find this predictable pattern that isn't necessarily obvious. But his idea was still that you need to find the precise prediction. Well, my interpretation is rather the brain likes this game of trying to predict things, but knowing that it will never completely predict it. And that's what makes the music interesting, that it's partly predictable, partly unpredictable. And to generate that kind of music, there must be an underlying pattern, and it doesn't really matter whether that pattern is the game that Vincenzo was speaking about, or some other kind of algorithm, or some other kind of rules. That's not the most important thing. I think the brain implicitly picks up some of these regularities, but without being able to tell you what regularity is, because you don't need to know what regularity is. You need to be prepared. The brain needs to have some idea of what can happen, what cannot happen. And when the brain gets an idea of this kind of semi-predictable things, then the brain is happy.
Well, I think this is
Felix, let's continue in order. Felix has raised his hand, then Orion, and then Christian.
Let me enter.
I think that I'm sorry, it's my turn. I think that I agree, but that's cultural. What you accept as dissonant or consonant or beautiful or not beautiful, it's trained by your family, by your origin, by your brought up, by your raising, by your race. Everything that fed you to be a human defines what you find beautiful or not. And that's very important because that's the brain is something that's moving, that is growing, is changing, and that's not something biological set up at the beginning. It's something that changes all the time. That's why you when you're a kid you listen to one kind of music. When you're a teenager you listen to another music, and when you grow up you like another kind of music. So everything is moving at the same time. The observer, I mean the listener, as Cage pointed out, is a very important part of the music process. And for me, the 4.33 minutes, it's about that. It's the importance of the listener, of what music really is.
I fully agree. I mean, the brain tries to extract patterns, and of course, the pattern that the brain knows well, like with, in our case, harmonic music following certain rules of tonality, those will be the patterns that the brain find easy to extract. The patterns in serial music, unless you are used to it at first sight, the brain will say, no, there is no pattern, I don't like it. So it is indeed, the brain learns to repeated exposure, but even when there has not been a repeated exposure, it's smart enough to see there is some kind of a structure in there. But if you have had repeated exposure, you will find the structure more easily, and you will find more structure in it. And as you say, listening to a piece of Cage, you have to be very plastic with your brain and let it open to find structures in there that it usually doesn't pay attention to.
But I mean, Francis, I think if I agree with everything you're saying, there's nothing really controversial there for me. It's just, I think you're doing a different, I think there's different experiments going on. So I think you're doing this kind of Cage trick, you're doing this kind of John Cage Trickster experiment, saying the experiment that you're talking about, you could do just by making random sounds, playing radios together, putting different kind of random audio files together, all kinds of things, and then just asking the audience what regularities and what patterns do they hear. And certainly you'd find some, as Cage has discovered. And this is an important aspect of art. There's a openness to chance and noise and all these things. That's one experiment, right? But there's another experiment which is about how to take the regularities implicit in that are being described in chemical organization theory and put that into a piece of music. And that's just a different experiment. Not that what you're saying doesn't have something important to say about that, because it is important for me, or at least I imagine for everyone, that you would be able to extract some useful or beautiful or interesting or puzzling or incomplete information about chemical organization theory by listening to this piece of music or this live composition or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's the idea. Our brain is very good at recognizing patterns even when it doesn't know these patterns. And acoustically, we are probably better at recognizing patterns in time. And COT for me is a process, formalism for describing processes, things that change in time but that have some regularities. So that was why my original proposal was, if we translate COT into music, our brain may be able to pick up patterns and regularities in there that we wouldn't if we just put it on paper or put it in a computer's program.
So, Christian, please.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Oh, it's okay. So
Yeah.
then the other.
Yeah, I agree very much with what Francis was saying there. To the question, what is music? So there are probably other aspects even than only the mixture of randomness and pre-structure. I think there is even a connection with history, and this was mentioned also. There's a cultural aspect, of course. Everybody agrees with that, but all this together makes a very complicated complicated manner what the brain does. In a more general thing, I can perhaps make a simple model like that. You could say there is something outside, and we spoke already about that. There's something outside, and the state, the reality state of this outside, and then there is the interface that we are, and we can make with it. So there's a kind of a preparing state outside, and a kind of measurement that we make. And that seems to be very general, at least in a simple way to look at it. And what Francis said is a much more specific way of looking at already, I think. And more specifics can still be brought in, I think, yeah. But all this makes whatever these people all are doing with music very fascinating, yeah, because it's an exploration of getting to know more of it. I also agree with Orion, and Francis even confirmed that, the specific idea of trying to recognize COT, that is of course another type of challenge, yeah? Whether this will lead to something. But I agree also with Francis there that since we probably are really better to recognize patterns that are processes by our hearing than by our vision. That is a fascinating idea that could lead to something very interesting.
May I say a little comment just to expand, and I think it's the right moment to say that. I see a very interesting connection to some creativity and cognition research, and particularly to one article, one result that was obtained with a simple experiment, having cards representing figures, stuff like a ball, an apple, a plane, the sun, like those that esoteric things that represent things, like just having very basic shapes or very basic meaning stuff, things that we attribute meaning to, an apple, let's say dinner or something. And they have like 80 cards, and they give it to people and say, you have to group it in collections of between 7 and 10 cards, and categorize these cards in whatever way you want. So they took like 100 people and did this, and several people provided very similar categories, like fruits, like moments of the day, transportation for the car, bus, metro, and so on. And some other people created very creative, let's say, very not expected categories, like putting together whatever, the sky, the ocean, and a volcano, and saying the eyes of God, something like completely unexpected category. So the result was that they kind of hypothesized that whatever deck of cards you create, whatever categorization process you define, people will be able to find regularities and create patterns. And also across many people, you will find many different solutions to that. So that's something that is kind of natural to us, so the way we attribute meaning. So I make this connection because I think there can be research done. And then what is the scientific aspect of it is that you can look at a certain culture or maybe some features for the subjects in the study, and then make a correlation between the categories that are discovered with the properties of the group. These properties might be psychological or cultural or whatever might shape this. And that would be the scientific aspect of it. Like, what are the properties of the entities that make them understand things this way or another? So that's the first comment. And the second comment, I wanted to just like input things and about jokes. I think jokes are a very, very, very interesting element of understanding this meaning generation, because when we understand the joke, when we get the joke, the punchline or the joke in general, we tend to laugh, right? We feel like, oh, this is funny. And I think that this is an evolutionary response, that because you are able to be plastic enough to change your setting so you understand the joke, because always jokes are about understanding things in a way that wasn't expected. So this plasticity of your mind is compensated, or it's rewarded by a pleasure feeling that is laughing. So I believe that we laugh because it's evolutionary stable to do so. So, well, just an interesting thought that I had to share. And the other thing I wanted to say, Vincenzo, sorry, it's just like comments to drop, like I feel like saying here. Your model basically is like you can map a Wolfram automaton to a musical piece, right?
Yes.
And your automatons are somehow kind of Markovian in the sense that they don't have memory of what has been coming before. The only thing is that if the notes is the same, then you repeat. Is there any other memory process? Because the rhythm, it's actually, abstractly speaking, a consequence of remembering the past.
The fact is, I'm using, in my own experiments, I'm using dynamic systems. And dynamic systems are not Markovian in a sense. I mean, they do depend on the past,
history,
because they are a trajectory in time. And each step depends on the previous one.
But through the function, not directly through the state.
Through the input. The input to the function is a state in a sense.
It's deterministic. No. When I said Markovian, I meant only that you take the current state and you know what's coming next.
Yeah. You cannot get to state N if you are not traveled through all the previous states. This concept of the Grundgestalt says that everything can be traced back step by step to the first Big Bang, let's say, moment where the theme was exposed.
So the question or the comment I wanted to bring was more like, if you have thought of playing, let's say, the Wolfram automatons, which are so kind of like dynamical processes that are kind of, people have interest on them and so on. So and they also are two-dimensional. So,
yes.
So you can look at the neighborhood, or like Ising models, spin models, or.
It is a very excellent and an excellent idea, and I'm sure that there is already someone that did experiment with this.
Yeah.
And indeed,
I'm sure,
when I was looking at my Heartquake model, I forgot to mention that this can be a very, let's say, non-analytical way to express one of the rules of Wolfram. So in the end, it is a cellular automaton.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
It can be considered as something that affects a string, so a set of states, and then it changes the position of the elements in it without destroying elements and without adding new elements. So with specific constraints. So it's like you have a role in artificial life. You apply the rule and see what happens, and you see how the things change. But I think in artificial life, then you can have elements that disappear, others that are brought back. And I think COT is also something that has this property of states that are not, I mean, that stay the same, although sometimes they go in the background and then they come back on the foreground. For this, I will need the opinion of Francis, because I'm absolutely no expert. But actually, what I did is working with dynamic systems as a form of rule, a la Wolfram, let's say.
Yeah. Wolfram,
So
yes.
I think your observation is very important, very to the point. Also, I wanted to if I may add something, I was listening to Diederik's reference to Pythagoras, and also I was listening to Francis' idea of this nice trade-off between expected and unexpected that makes something relevant, makes something really worth of some artistic value sometimes, in some cases. And I thought of something completely different. I read a book once that really changed my life. I liked the book so very much. It's a novel by a famous scientist. It's called A for Andromeda. And it was this idea of someone that was a radio telescope observatory, and they were listening to something coming in from space. They were saying from Andromeda because that was the direction the telescope was pointing towards the Andromeda galaxy. But they were receiving some message, some elements, right? It's like the idea of Pythagoras that the cosmos creates music. And it was something that was being received. And then there was someone between the people at the observatory that was able to grasp a regularity. They said, but I see something in here that it's not random. And then it started printing. The book was written in the 60s. So it's really printing on paper on those strange printing machines. And he was consuming a lot of paper. And then at some point, he found that the thing was a message because it was repeating itself. So at some point, he found a cycle. And this corresponds to the idea of the dynamic system in which you have orbits. They seem to be completely unrelated until you find out the function that produces the elements. And then what you're looking for are the properties of these dynamic systems, which are, for instance, the presence of cycles. And these cycles are really, from my point of view, corresponds to the regularity that Francis was. So if you see it in music, it's like you see the theme. At some point, there is an end of the theme, and maybe it's repeated. And the mind is able to see, to understand this repetition, or maybe the diversity in the repetition, and to make a comparison, to put the two things together and recognize them as the same message, maybe repeated in another tone. Right? It says they seem different, but they are actually the same, and I understand. And this is like the joke that you were saying. So getting the joke. So it's all about the same thing to me. It's like we are talking about different aspects, but I start to realize that, for instance, a dynamic system is like a way to represent a process that might have repetitions, and whose interpretations might be turned into a message, like the message received from Andromeda. And it's a message that comes from the sky, like Diederik was mentioning. I mean, talking about Pythagoras. I mean, Pythagoras was, he mentioned Pythagoras, and Pythagoras was one of the first to formulate that music could be obtained by any type of vibration, even the one that you can find coming from the cosmos.
I thought about a psychological experiment of so-called implicit learning. Implicit learning is when people learn some regularity, but without being aware that they have learned anything. And I don't remember the details of how they generated the data, but they generated strings of data like letters, like say A, C, D, G, F, B, K, and so on, like a little bit like your message from Andromeda. But it was generated according to some complicated system that there was a regularity in it, but the regularity was not at all obvious. There was no repetition in it. And the people didn't learn to predict exactly, but they learned to predict statistically in the sense that they let people guess, like you have got this thing like F, G, K, Y, O, P, what will be the next one? And they guessed with much better than chance. So if they would have just randomly, they would, let's say there would be 26 letters, there would have been one chance in 26 to be correct. But they guessed maybe with one chance in 5 to be correct. And you can say, well, they still can't predict it, but to go from 1 in 26 to 1 in 21 in 5, that means that you have improved 5 times over randomness. So that means the brain has implicitly learned, because if they asked those people, why did you think that the next one would be, let's say, an O, they couldn't explain. They didn't know the rule. So the rule was kind of implicitly learned by their neural network. And the rule was not deterministic in this case, but it was good enough to make it much more predictable than you would have guessed than if it would have been random. And I think in music, probably you would have the same. If you would let somebody listen to a melody for the first time, and then you stop it in the middle of the melody and let them guess what would be the next note, I'm pretty sure they would guess with better than chance what the next note would be. They wouldn't be able to guess exactly, but instead of having to say all the notes, they would be more likely to have the right note.
Especially if the function is known. I mean, if you tell it, we are talking about jazz music, then you'll get a prediction which is different from one like we are talking about classical music.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been different depending on the genre of music and depending on what people have been listening to beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the learning aspect.
I might perhaps add to that that I've talked to many people about this idea, and many seem to recognize it, that there are, in our Western music, I think, and the exploration of our Western music, there are two summits of structure. And that's the harmonic structure with Bach and so on. But then you also have a lot of structure in jazz. And in some way you can see that these are two kind of summits, I think. And then there's music is more directed theatrically, where you can see the and so on and so on. I also want to correct a little bit. When I said I don't agree with Cage, it's not that I would say that Cage didn't make music. I don't know. But I think you can classify that almost on the where you could classify philosophically Zen, you see. Cage was busy with consciousness on that kind of level. Of course, it's a fantastic idea to make a piece of music where it's just silence. It's almost a Zen statement, I would say. So also that is very intriguing. Huh? I would still classify it inside of all what is ongoing, but of course it's a limit case. You could also say that if you just tape the noise of a waterfall in nature, you could still see it as a limit case. And like an observation is a limit case of a measurement. An observation, we don't influence anything. You just observe.
I think it's a question of what your audience is capable of. You know, if your audience is capable of standing around a waterfall and applauding it, then it can be great. But it's also if your audience isn't capable of understanding all the functions and the systems that go into it, they're also just not going to understand the music
but
in the way that you understand the music.
Yeah, but I would say if the audience makes something special of the waterfall, they make the music, more of it at least, you know, than the waterfall. That's possible, of course. Huh?
Yeah, but audiences change through time. It's not a static thing.
Audience can be very active in participating in making the music. Huh?
Right, yeah, and that's also a historical thing.
Yeah, but that's not the waterfall then. The waterfall can be a trigger then, definitely. But I would look.
Yeah, of course it's a trigger.
Yeah, but I would say you should see where it happens. It happens in the audience then, which is perfect also. You could
it doesn't only happen in the audience. It happens in both.
Yeah, in both. But
you can't expect your audience to understand something that they can't understand. Say if I took you to the waterfall and but if I was to take somebody else, like, you know, if I was to take John Cage or Christian or whoever, like maybe they would have a wonderful time. The waterfall is the same.
Yeah, but it's interesting also to add the element of how could I give that a name? I'm always inspired a little bit by what we do in science also, to add the element. For example, you have one extreme where you just observe in science. It almost never happens. But astronomy, for example, you can say we just observe the cosmos. What we do on Earth has not a lot of influence on what happens with the stars and with the universe. When you are an engineer and you make a machine, you almost never observe. You put a lot yourself in it. You create at the same time. So this kind of duality you have in art also, I think. And usually where the process is, you will say that's where it most of all happened. And there are also the borders where also things happen, but more limit cases. You could give instruments to the audience and let them play. Give them all a violin and a piece of flute. But then we would localize all the music there. Well, anyhow, it's not such an important aspect, but I think it's also important, at least in getting more down deep in modeling of what is happening.
Yeah, for that, because of time constraints, we are like 2 hours time, and for the chemical organization theory, just to wrap things up, they can be converted easily into dynamical systems. I didn't elaborate on that in the introductory talk. We haven't elaborated on that yet, and there are many ways to do that. And organizations then perhaps will play the role. I mean, sorry, just to make it very quick to finish, each species. So if I have 3 molecules, let's say A, B, C, so this will be my coordinates from where it's an example to make a musical system following your approach. So each molecule will be one of the coordinates of the game. So for one A, B, C, you say 0, 0, 1, this will be the concentration of A, the concentration of B, and the concentration of C. So then the game will be to exchange these molecules, so put them together to transform some of them into the others. So then you will start with a very big orchestra, being all the possible molecules you can play with, because groups of molecules will become instruments, following the very similar analogy to yours. And then you will start with a big crowd, big orchestra playing, or maybe with a little group of instruments at the beginning, and then the dynamics will unfold and evolve to a certain group of instruments, which will be the final organization, performing music following certain patterns, certain cycles, which will correspond to the cyclic orbits you were describing in your talk. So I think there is a very straightforward way to sound chemical organizations, you know, to play chemical organizations. So it's because it's our dynamical systems. It's because that trivial fact. And yeah, so with this, I will prefer to leave the talk up to here for today. We will have the talks that I announced in the beginning. So Katerina here will talk about the impossibles and the infinites, and we'll talk about the untalkable and make us think about the unthinkable. And then we will have the other speakers coming, Karsten and Stan. And then after that, we were very likely, or we're very willing to organize working sessions. So what that means, that will make sort of groups that will work on certain specific ideas, so we can meet kind of regularly, just maybe every 2 weeks, every 3-4 weeks, I don't know, and show each other's advances on our own projects. So at least with Vincenzo, I will be part of your team, Vincenzo, and develop chemical organizations and network models, which we are building a software now. So it will be very easy, perhaps very easy to connect the software directly to your device.
Wonderful.
And this translation will not be so complicated, so we can kind of put together these things. And
Fantastic.
and of course, well, we still have to see what Karsten is preparing. So maybe there will be another machine there. So we are kind of about to start our experimental art scientific lab. And that's very exciting.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Thank you everyone for participating today. It was really, as usual, a really mind-blowing conversation. And thank you also for the audience who is watching the video on YouTube. And we will meet on the next session in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
So
thank
we
you
can
very
stop
much,
the recording
everyone.
now. Thank you, Vincenzo.
Thanks a lot for your
Vincenzo,
attention
thank you
and
very much.
the very nice questions.